She walked me outside, then whispered the words I never expected. "I was hoping you'd stay." The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine from the garden. I had been sitting on the couch at my friend's house, scrolling through my phone to pass the time, when his older sister appeared in the doorway. She was striking not in a flashy way, but in a quiet, confident way that immediately drew my attention. In her early 40s, she moved with an ease and poise that contrasted sharply with my own awkward energy. She wore a soft, casual outfit, a loose blouse and fitted jeans, that seemed effortless yet perfectly suited her figure. "Hey," she said, her voice gentle but teasing. "Want to come outside for a minute? I want to show you something." I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Alone outside with her. My heart jumped, but I nodded anyway. There was something in the way she smiled, half inviting, half knowing, that made it impossible to refuse. The porch was bathed in a warm, golden light, and the garden beyond was shadowed with hints of night. As I stepped outside, the cool breeze brushed against my skin, and I could hear the faint rustle of leaves overhead. She lingered a few steps ahead, glancing back at me with that easy confidence that made me feel simultaneously nervous and at ease. We walked slowly, talking about nothing in particular at first, the weather, the subtle changes in the garden, small anecdotes about my friend. But everything she said seemed to carry a weight, a subtle charm that made me hang on her words. She laughed softly at one of my awkward jokes, and I noticed the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the warmth in her gaze. I found myself acutely aware of her presence. The gentle sway of her hair as it caught the evening light, the quiet rhythm of her steps, even the faint perfume lingering in the air, it all seemed amplified in the calm of the twilight. My own hands brushed against the porch railing, a little closer to her than strictly necessary, almost as if drawn toward her without thinking. At one point, she stopped and looked at me directly, tilting her head slightly. "It's nice, isn't it? Just outside," she said, her voice soft, almost wistful. I felt a sudden warmth in my chest, a curious mix of admiration and nervous anticipation. I realized I was paying attention to every detail. The gentle curve of her smile, the way her shoulders relaxed when she laughed, the confidence in her posture. It was just a simple moment, a casual invitation outside, but it carried an unexpected weight. For the first time that evening, I sensed that this encounter was more than mere politeness or routine. There was a subtle electricity in the space between us, a quiet tension that hinted at something unspoken. As I stood there, a few feet apart from her, I couldn't help but wonder, was she aware of it too? That's when she smiled again, just for me and everything else. The cool night air, the fading light, the quiet of the garden, seemed to fall away. And I knew, even then, that this ordinary evening was about to become anything but ordinary. We lingered outside long after the initial reason for stepping out had passed. The porch light painted soft, golden halos around her silhouette, and the garden beyond was a blur of shadows and muted colors. I realized I was noticing everything about her, the way her fingers traced the edge of the railing absent-mindedly, the subtle tilt of her head when she laughed, the quiet confidence in the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. I tried to focus on casual conversation, asking about her day, making small comments about the flowers and the fading light. Yet, every time I looked at her, I felt a flutter in my chest that made my words stumble. She had this way of making even the simplest interactions feel weighty, like a private language spoken in glances and gestures rather than words. At one point, a soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and the crispness of evening air. She laughed lightly as a strand of hair fell across her cheek, tucking it behind her ear with the elegance that seemed effortless but captivated me nonetheless. I noticed my own hand brushing against the railing, closer to hers than necessary, almost as if drawn by gravity. "Do you come here often?" I asked, more out of habit than curiosity. She turned slightly toward me, her expression unreadable but warm, and for a moment our shoulders nearly touched. "Sometimes," she replied, and there was a pause in her voice that made me wonder if she meant just that, or if there was something more she wasn't saying. I could feel the air charged in that pause, a delicate tension I didn't quite know how to navigate. We fell into a rhythm of easy conversation, punctuated by quiet moments where neither of us spoke. In the silence, I found myself acutely aware of her presence. The subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the slight sway of her hair in the breeze. It was the kind of attention that made time stretch, each second heavy with possibilities I wasn't ready to confront. I caught her eyes more than once, those warm, steady eyes that seemed to see through me in a way that was both exhilarating and unnerving. Her gaze lingered, and I felt my own heart respond, a mix of nervousness and anticipation I couldn't quite hide. When she laughed at something small I said, the sound seemed to resonate in the cool night air, drawing me closer in ways I couldn't rationalize. Even though we kept a polite distance, every gesture felt intimate. The tilt of her head, the subtle brushing of her hand against her arm, the way she leaned slightly toward me when sharing a thought. It all created a quiet tension that was almost tangible. I realized, with a mix of excitement and apprehension, that this simple evening outside was already shaping something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but I didn't want to stop it either. By the time the conversation dwindled, I felt a magnetic pull toward her I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just attraction. It was fascination, admiration, and a strange sense of comfort all rolled into one. And as I stood there, heart racing in the soft glow of the porch light, I understood that these lingering moments were only the beginning of something I would remember far longer than the night itself. The evening had deepened, and the soft glow from the porch lamp now seemed warmer, almost protective, as if it was framing this moment just for us. We had walked a few steps into the garden, the air cooler now, carrying the subtle scent of earth and jasmine mingled with the crispness of approaching night. She leaned casually against the railing, and I found myself lingering a little too close, drawn in by the ease in her posture and the quiet magnetism she radiated. Our conversation, which had begun as light and playful, slowly shifted. She asked about my plans, my dreams, and, hesitantly, I found myself sharing more than I intended. I spoke about the small insecurities I kept tucked away from most people, the parts of myself I rarely revealed even to my closest friends. And she listened, really listened, with an attentiveness that made me feel seen in a way that surprised me. "You're more thoughtful than you let on," she said softly, tilting her head, her eyes warm and steady. There was no judgment, only curiosity and understanding. The tone of her voice, hushed and intimate, made the space between us feel smaller, almost suspended. I glanced at her, noticing how the light caught the gentle curve of her smile, the subtle warmth in her eyes. She had a way of holding attention without seeming to try, a quiet grace that made the air around her feel heavier and lighter all at once. The cool night breeze ruffled her hair slightly, and instinctively, I found myself wishing I could reach out to tuck it behind her ear. Not in a bold move, just a careful, gentle gesture to bridge the invisible distance. At one point, she extended her hand slightly, resting it briefly on my forearm as if to reassure me. The touch was light, almost casual, yet it carried an unexpected weight. My pulse quickened at the contact, an innocent, fleeting connection that somehow spoke volumes. I was painfully aware of the sensation, the warmth of her skin against mine, the careful, unspoken language of trust and subtle affection that hung between us. We talked about life, love, regrets, and the things we rarely admit aloud. Her voice had a soft vulnerability, carefully guarded but visible to anyone patient enough to notice. And as she spoke, I felt a resonance, a quiet acknowledgement that we were both navigating uncertainties, both carrying histories and hesitations, and both, in this moment, choosing to share them. There was a stillness that followed, punctuated only by the distant chirp of crickets and the whisper of leaves overhead. I realized that every glance, every half-smile, every subtle movement was layered with meaning. A slow, tender intimacy that didn't need words to exist. By the time our conversation dwindled, a quiet understanding had settled between us. It wasn't attraction in its simplest form. It was connection, delicate and profound. A trust slowly forming in the shared vulnerability of two people standing in the garden at twilight. I knew that what had begun as a casual evening outside was deepening into something far more significant, and neither of us wanted to rush it. And in that quiet, suspended moment, I felt the unmistakable stirrings of something unspoken, a bond that was becoming impossible to ignore. The garden had grown darker, yet the soft glow from the porch lamp painted everything in a warm, inviting light. Shadows stretched across the path, but she seemed to shine in it, a quiet presence that demanded attention without ever asking for it. We had moved from the railing to a small bench tucked under a tree, where the air was cooler and the soft hum of crickets added a gentle soundtrack to our conversation. Her laughter came easily now, light and teasing, and I found myself leaning in slightly, drawn by the sound more than the words themselves. She had this effortless way of making even the simplest remarks feel layered, as if every sentence carried an unspoken meaning. When she brushed a strand of hair from her face, the movement was so natural it seemed choreographed for my gaze alone. "So, you really think you can beat me at chess?" she asked with a sly smile, a hint of challenge in her tone. I had no idea what she was talking about. She was referencing some offhand comment I made earlier, but I laughed nervously, feeling the warmth of her gaze settle on me like a quiet spotlight. The teasing was playful, harmless, yet somehow charged with a subtle tension I couldn't ignore. I noticed the small gestures she made, so simple yet intimate. Her fingers tapping lightly on the bench as she leaned toward me, the way her shoulder brushed against mine when she shifted, the tilt of her head that seemed to study me without words. I caught myself wondering if she noticed the effect she had on me. My heartbeat quickening, my palms slightly clammy, my mind caught between casual conversation and an unspoken awareness of her presence. "Don't look so serious," she said suddenly, tilting her head with a soft laugh. "You look like you're trying to solve a puzzle instead of just enjoying this." Her words were teasing, yes, but there was a warmth underneath that made my chest tighten. I smiled awkwardly, realizing I had been analyzing every gesture, every glance, as if reading a code I wasn't entirely ready to decipher. The breeze stirred again, ruffling her hair slightly, and I instinctively wanted to reach out. Not boldly, just a careful, almost protective movement to tuck it behind her ear. I caught myself before I did, but the thought lingered, leaving a strange ache of desire mixed with hesitation. Every small movement between us seemed magnified. The way her eyes caught mine in a fleeting glance, the subtle shift of her weight when she laughed, the quiet rhythm of our breathing as the evening stretched on. We lingered in this delicate dance, neither of us rushing, both of us aware of the growing electricity in the space between us. It was a flirtation not of words alone, but of presence, of energy, of small touches and lingering glances. I realized, with both excitement and nervousness, that I was falling into the rhythm she had set, one of teasing, playful intimacy, and unspoken tension. By the time we finally stood to move back toward the house, my chest was still tight with anticipation, my mind replaying every glance, every brush of skin, every soft laugh. This wasn't just a casual evening anymore. The slow burn had deepened, the attraction subtly shifting into something impossible to ignore, and I knew, with a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension, that we were only just beginning to explore the unspoken connection growing between us. The garden was quieter now, the night settling into a gentle stillness that felt almost intimate, like it existed just for us. The porch light cast long, soft shadows across the grass, and the faint scent of jasmine mixed with the crispness of the evening air. I could feel every sound more acutely, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a car on the street, even the subtle rhythm of her breathing beside me. We had been standing there for a while, talking in fits and starts, our words light but layered with unspoken meaning. There was a pause, one of those silences that felt heavier than conversation, and she tilted her head slightly toward me. Her eyes, reflecting the soft lamplight, held a warmth that seemed to pierce right through the careful boundaries we had both maintained. "I was hoping you'd stay," she said, almost in a whisper. The words hit me with a quiet force, simple yet heavy with implication. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened. It was not just the invitation to linger in the night. It was an admission, subtle yet intimate, that she wanted my presence for more than just casual company. I found myself staring at her, searching her face for any hint of jest, but her expression was sincere, soft, and unguarded. The moment stretched. My own hesitation became a physical weight. I wanted to respond, to say something that wouldn't break the fragile intimacy we were sharing, but words felt clumsy against the intensity of the feeling between us. Instead, I shifted slightly closer, careful not to intrude, my shoulder brushing hers almost accidentally. The small contact seemed to settle a silent agreement. Neither of us needed to rush this, but neither wanted to step away either. She smiled, faintly, and there was something almost shy in the gesture, as though admitting this desire was both freeing and frightening. The warmth in her eyes lingered, and I realized I was acutely aware of the subtle closeness. The quiet rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the faint warmth of her skin near mine, the softness in her voice that carried more than just words. "I didn't mean to," she began, then paused, letting the thought remain unfinished, a delicate thread of vulnerability hanging between us. I understood immediately. She was opening a door, leaving it up to me whether we would step through together or retreat. I felt an almost dizzying mix of emotions: exhilaration, nervousness, awe, and something deeper, an acknowledgement of the bond that had been forming over these evenings of slow, quiet connection. For the first time, I sensed the full weight of what we were feeling, a tension that was not impulsive but patient, respectful, and profound. The breeze stirred, lifting a strand of her hair against her cheek, and I instinctively wanted to reach out, but I hesitated, savoring the charged pause. There was a magic in the stillness, a silent communication far more powerful than words could capture. That night, in the quiet of the garden, with only the soft hum of the world around us, the subtle tension between us became undeniable. Her words had shifted everything, opening a door to a connection I knew I could no longer ignore. And in that fragile, perfect moment, I realized this slow-burn attraction had moved beyond playful curiosity into something deeply, undeniably real. The walk home was quiet, the night settling over the streets like a soft, velvet blanket. Each step echoed faintly against the pavement, but it wasn't the sound of the city that filled my mind. It was her words, the warmth of her voice, the way her gaze had lingered just a moment too long. "I was hoping you'd stay." The phrase repeated itself in my head, looping endlessly, like a song I couldn't quite forget. I felt a strange combination of exhilaration and unease. Part of me thrilled at the thought that she, someone so composed, so confident, had expressed a desire for my company in such an intimate, deliberate way. And yet another part of me hesitated, reminded of the age gap between us, the social expectations, the lines that neither of us had yet crossed but that still hovered in the background. I walked slower, letting my hands brush absently against the cool street lamp poles as I replayed the evening in vivid detail. I could see her clearly in my mind, the way the porch light had caught her hair, the faint glimmer in her eyes, the subtle tilt of her head when she spoke. I could almost feel her hand brushing my arm again, even though it was hours ago. That light, fleeting touch had left a trace, a reminder that connection didn't need words to exist. Every detail, every nuance of her presence, seemed to be amplified in the quiet of the night. I thought about the way her laughter had floated in the air, soft and teasing, how her perfume had lingered just long enough to make me aware of her closeness, and how the gentle breeze had carried both the scent of jasmine and the electricity of the moment. Even the smallest gestures, the brush of her hair, the slight leaning toward me, had left impressions deeper than I expected. And yet, with all the desire and curiosity, there was a weight of uncertainty. Could this attraction survive the unspoken complexities? Could I allow myself to feel this way without overstepping boundaries or ruining the delicate intimacy we had cultivated? My mind raced with hypothetical conversations, imagined scenarios where I stayed longer, where we laughed together under the night sky, where I didn't have to leave this suspended space of tension. I found myself touching my own hair unconsciously, mimicking the small movements she had made, a nervous habit reflecting the stirrings inside me. My pulse was still quickened by the memory of her gaze, by the unspoken acknowledgement between us that something had shifted. The quiet streets became a mirror of my own hesitation, calm on the surface but alive with energy just beneath. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt both exhausted and oddly alive, carrying the night's moments in my chest like a secret jewel. Her words had changed everything. They had transformed a simple evening into a memory I couldn't escape, a tension I didn't want to resolve too quickly. And as I lay awake, replaying the tiny, meaningful details, I understood that our story was only beginning, that the slow, careful dance we were engaged in had already taken root, promising something far deeper than either of us had dared to imagine. The next evening, I found myself back at the porch, drawn by an unspoken pull I didn't fully understand but couldn't resist. The air was warmer than the night before, carrying the scent of blooming flowers and the faint tang of freshly cut grass. The world felt quieter here, as if it had folded in around us to create a small, private space where nothing else existed. She was already outside, leaning casually against the railing, the same soft smile tugging at her lips that had haunted my thoughts since the last night. She wore a comfortable sweater and jeans, casual and effortless, yet somehow entirely captivating. When she saw me, her eyes lit up briefly, and that small gesture, a simple acknowledgement of my presence, made my chest tighten in anticipation. "Hey," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice betrayed me with its slight roughness. "Hey," she replied, her tone warm, unhurried, as though she had all the time in the world. There was no pretense between us now, no casual distance. It felt different, closer, softer, and infinitely more personal. We walked slowly into the garden, side by side, letting our conversation meander through trivialities at first. But soon the rhythm of our dialogue shifted. We paused in a small clearing beneath the soft glow of a porch light, the shadows dancing around us as if accentuating the tension neither of us wanted to name out loud. Then she looked at me, really looked, and I felt the world shrink down to just the two of us. "I'm glad you came back," she said, her voice almost a whisper. I could feel the warmth in her words, the careful weight of meaning behind them. I hesitated for a moment, unsure how to bridge the distance that had grown larger in my mind than it was in reality. Then, gently, I reached out, letting my fingers brush against her arm. She didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly toward me, a silent invitation. The contact was simple, casual even, yet loaded with a depth of feeling that neither words nor hesitation could contain. We stayed like that for a long moment, sharing a quiet understanding that everything we had felt, the laughter, the teasing, the lingering glances, the small touches, had led us here. It wasn't about rushing or defining what this was. It was about acknowledging the bond that had grown between us, fragile but undeniable. I like this," she said softly, a trace of vulnerability threading through her confident tone. "Being here, with you." I smiled, my chest swelling with a mix of relief and something heavier, more profound. "Me too," I admitted, careful not to overstate, but also careful not to hide how I felt. The night air wrapped around us as we stood side by side, close but not pressing, sharing warmth without words. There was a lingering touch of her hand against mine as we turned to leave, subtle but meaningful, a promise that this was only the beginning of something significant. And as we walked back toward the house, the gentle quiet of the night around us, I realized that the slow burn had reached its resolution. Not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with honesty, intimacy, and the delicate acknowledgement of shared desire. We didn't need more than that. The connection we had nurtured in moments of quiet vulnerability and playful tension was enough. In that golden glow of the porch and the soft scent of the night, everything felt settled. The distance of years, the uncertainty, the hesitation, it didn't matter anymore. We were here, together, aware of what we felt, and ready to see where it could go. If you felt the tension, the longing, or the quiet magic between them, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more slow burn romances that linger in your heart. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had a moment that made time feel like it stopped?